Yes, okay. We have decided to get started even before all the technical issues have been solved, so that we can utilize the time and respect your presence here for this session. The session is a recurrent session, B1, Women Building Peace and Resilient Communities. We are blessed to have 7 discussion starters, 2 of whom are on Zoom, and we are facilitating their presence with us. And we have the privilege of having 5 of them with us here. And 2 of us will be facilitating, my colleague, Paula, and myself. My name is Musimbi Kanyoro. I am here as a part of the members of Concerned African Women Theologians, and I will tell you a little bit about them in time. And my colleague, Paula, is...
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to moderate this crucial discussion when women build peace and resilient communities. As we gather here, we are reminded that women's equality and leadership are not just peripheral issues, but are central to global progress, as highlighted in G20 agenda. While women have always played significant roles in their communities, particularly within religious spheres, their contributions often go unrecognized. And let's use the time together to deepen our understanding, sharing insights, and moving forward with actionable steps that can amplify women's roles in building peace and foster resilient communities. I look forward to our discussions and the diverse perspectives each of you will bring. We have some technical issues, but I think you can start to hear if Maricarmen is okay. So it'll be a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you, Paola. It's great to join you, and it's an honor to participate in this panel addressing the intersection between women and building peace and resilient communities. Coming from the multilateral perspective from the Organization of American States, I think it's important to mention from the outset that we are at a critical point in time because there's a very low number of women in leadership positions in multilateralism. I think the numbers that have come through in the past few years have noted around 12% of women achieving leadership positions in multilateralism since 1945 in the different organizations. Many organizations, such as the UN and our own organization, the OAS, have never had female secretary generals. So that from the outset creates a difficult scenario from where to speak. But we do have a lot going on in terms of promoting and making sure that women's voices are being heard and that reality changes in the near future, hopefully. And at the intersection between religious and faith-based communities and female in leadership, it's important also to note that there is a very broad agenda that's being addressed by member states and by our Secretary General, Luis Almagro, in terms of supporting the right freedom of religion. And among those commitments coming from member states, there is an invitation to create a space for dialogue at the multilateral level. We do understand that dialogue is a cornerstone to building peace in the region. And when we have leadership within faith-based communities and we have women taking on the role as peacemakers, that can really make a change. And some of the components that have come out of those positions and those recommendations and declarations from member states and from the Secretary General points us to 3 main characteristics that I would like to point out that I think are relevant in this conversation. One of them is the focus on pluralism. And I think this is important because it doesn't only mean further analysis and theoretical understanding of what pluralism means, but also what pluralism can look like in action, which essentially means inclusion, diversity of voices, including women who compose half of our population. So we're by no means a minority. So when talking about understanding the participation of women within those conversations, within the context of religious freedom, and any actions that come from faith-based communities, pluralism means making sure that the women's voices within all of those communities are present and are duly represented, and that they are being heard in terms of historically how they have contributed to belief systems, to community building, to actions, and also going forward. Also, the participation of civil society. So civil society engagement within the multilateral context is also very important because it does allow for participation when not necessarily this is the case within the community. So even when we don't necessarily have a hierarchical participation of women, when you open up the space to civil society organizations that work with faith-based communities, we also have an opportunity for women to participate in dialogue under different capacities. And then we also have the component of intersectionality, which for the region, for the Americas, is extremely important. We know that our cultures have been built on very different beliefs, very different religious histories that have not often been very visible through time. And that is a reality that has, in some cases, impeded us from coming up with true solutions in peace-building spaces. So a lot of the conflict that we see in our region comes from difficulties in addressing the history of how our communities came about to be the way they are today. So when we talk about intersectionality and we understand the importance of that to the work that we do, for example, in access to rights at the OAS, we incorporate a vision of, for example, the role of Afro-descendant communities and spiritualities in the region, the role of indigenous communities in the region, and how they have influenced through time the belief systems that we have in place, and how that they can be today a part of a solution to the issues that we are facing. We've had a lot of conversations during the past couple of weeks where we commemorated the Inter-American Week for Indigenous People and the International Day of Indigenous People around climate change, for example, and how for many, many years, the participation, the solutions, the scientifically based concepts that indigenous communities bring to the table have often been forgotten or not considered. And it applies the same to the reality of women, to how women are of a matriarchal role in what they represent to the community, how they transmit faith, how they build the communities within the roles of their faith, and how their different components in that intersectionality can participate in a broad-based dialogue considering the diversity that we have in our region. So I'll leave it there with those three elements to kind of put the context, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll hear from Dani. Yes, because we don't have yet our other members. We have only one microphone.
Thank you very much, Musimi. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. So the issues before us are complex and very diverse, from women's equality and leadership to peaceful and resilient communities to issues of health, education, and economic empowerment. That's what the brief about this session said. So because these issues are as complex and the intersections between them even more numerous, I'm going to focus on two areas. The first being the sense of security from a woman's standpoint. And then the second one is on redefining the role that faith communities and faith actors can play in building peaceful and resilient communities. So for the first one in particular, I'm going to draw from my experience as having been a lawyer in India in the early years of my professional life, and And then once I moved to the United States and engaged with women's groups in the United States, I also, some of the experiences I had as a lawyer were confirmed. And that is that women see security, or they internalize a sense of security quite differently from that of men. Security for most women, and again, I'm careful not to generalize, but this has been my experience. Women see security as one where there is a sense of well-being in the community, where they have social security and resources available to them to be able to raise their children with a sense of security, where they are building a sense of community where, again, with their families' security in mind. So it's not only from a conflict standpoint. Of course, when women are in conflict situations, it's a different story. But when women are when they are looking for social services to be available to them on a regular basis. And for that reason, in fact, I would make a recommendation for IF20 to recommend to the governments of the G20 to reconceptualize peace and security to include things like access to social services, access to education, and the ability to look after the well-being of one's community. And these are some prerequisites to peace, and that the governments of the G20 need to rethink how they interpret security and provide for their communities. The second point, which I thought to address, is the role of religion in building peaceful and resilient communities. As we know, religion constitutes one of the deepest sources of motivation. But religious conviction by itself does not automatically translate into service to the common good. It's entirely possible that you could have a congregation of well-intentioned adherents whose actors do little to contribute to the betterment of society. So really when we talk about faith communities working to further peace and security in their communities, it's working with everybody in the community in order to promote peaceful and resilient societies. From our experience from Baha'i communities that are working at the level of community with everybody, it's women and men working alongside each other and alongside people of all faiths. Paola just said the pluralism in action, and that is, sorry, not Paola. Carmen said, pluralism in action, and that's what I'm referring to over here. We know that patriarchy, power, and privilege has prevented participation. So I think that's 5 Ps, but the new way of working, when women and men are working shoulder to shoulder, we are seeing that there's a transformation in their societies. The societies are becoming more resilient, there's more consultation, and one of the processes that we follow is that of action, reflection, and consultation. So you act on a plan, you reflect about it, you consult and modify it, and then continue to work together like that. And when women and men are working together with all faith groups in a society, we have seen that there is a systematic and scientific inquiry into communities that are learning to apply spiritual principles to advance broad-based social progress.
Boa tarde. Boa tarde. Inicio a minha fala saudando toda a ancestralidade feminina presente. E, com isso, afirmo que a ancestralidade não é algo que ficou no passado. E eu digo nas palavras de Catiúcia Ribeiro: a ancestralidade é o ventre materno, é o sopro de vida que é tecido no ventre da nossa mãe pelo sangue ancestral. É a música que faz vibrar as células do nosso corpo e dita no ritmo do nosso coração. É a poesia que acalma e perturba. É a filosofia e seus favos de sabedoria. É a luta pela vida, é a resistência à morte. É a natureza e manifestação da vida. É o movimento e caminhar em cada uma de nós, em cada pessoa que respira, a marca da ancestralidade. E agora eu peço permissão para as mulheres negras que vieram antes e foram silenciadas, para que eu possa seguir a minha fala. Saúdo com muita honra as mulheres aqui presentes na mesa e saúdo a todas em nome de Bani Dugal, que tive a honra de conhecer na ocasião do evento paralelo sobre diálogo interreligioso no Fórum de Alto Nível, em julho, em Nova York. E saúda todas as pessoas aqui presentes que consideram que este tema é basilar para a construção de uma sociedade mais equânime e sustentável. Meu nome é Elcimar Pereira, faço parte do GELEDES, Instituto da Mulher Negra, e é uma grande honra representar essa instituição que traz no seu próprio nome a história e a simbologia da luta coletiva de mulheres negras. E o termo GELEDE foi inspirado em uma das sociedades secretas femininas de caráter religioso existente nas sociedades tradicionais iorubá. A luta pela construção da paz e comunidades resilientes para algumas lideranças que são mulheres não é uma questão de escolha. É uma questão de necessidade e sobrevivência, da sua própria sobrevivência e a sobrevivência da sua comunidade. E esse perfil de liderança que precisa lutar pela paz, tem cor, tem território, uma prática religiosa e tem classe. Será que todos nós sabemos qual o perfil dessas mulheres? Quem são essas mulheres que estou falando? A sociedade, o mundo como um todo, já devia ter aprendido o ensinamento que algumas intelectuais negras têm já dito há muito tempo. Intelectuais essas que já têm reconhecimento internacional, como Sueli Carneiro, como Lélia Gonzalez, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, entre outras. Elas diziam que a categoria mulher não é algo universal. Portanto, em consonância com o que as minhas colegas já falaram também, existem maneiras que determinadas violências afetam e as nossas estratégias de lutas para essas violências e essas estratégias têm as suas especificidades. O que seria paz para uma mulher negra ribeirinha do Amazonas? O que seria paz para uma mulher negra haitiana praticante do voodoo? O que seria paz para uma mulher branca suíça cristã? Enfim, seria uma maravilha se os nossos marcadores de diferenças estivessem vinculados apenas às tonalidades de pele, tipos de cabelo, religião, escolhas profissionais, planos para o futuro. E se esses marcadores não gerassem tantas desigualdades e intolerâncias. Quero ressaltar o nome de 3 mulheres, que são exemplos de luta pela paz e resiliência na comunidade. Mãe Gilda de Ogum, Mãe Iá Mucumbi e Mãe Bernadette. O que essas mulheres teriam em comum? Todas foram lideranças mulheres negras que atuavam em prol de sua comunidade, de suas comunidades religiosas. Todas, com suas especificidades, atuavam em prol da equidade de gênero, raça e liberdade religiosa. O que mais teriam em comum essas lideranças que tanto nos ensinaram em relação à construção de paz e resiliência? As 3 foram assassinadas, vítimas de intolerância religiosa e racismo. Estou falando de assassinatos que ocorreram entre dos anos de 2000, 2013, 2023. Nós temos vários exemplos de mulheres que foram lideranças nas suas comunidades, promotoras de paz, cuidado, e em todo mundo que estão em todo mundo que estão sob ameaças às suas próprias vidas. Assim como mulheres negras de terreiro, a paz também está ameaçada de morte. Quem se responsabiliza por isso? O que precisamos fazer para que dezenas de acordos internacionais já promulgados nas Nações Unidas possam impactar, de fato, a realidade de lideranças mulheres que buscam promover a paz nas suas comunidades? Na semana passada, mais precisamente no dia 13/8 de 2024, por iniciativa do Brasil e Colômbia, foi proclamada a data de 25 de julho como Dia Internacional das Mulheres e Meninas Afrodescendentes, por meio da resolução adotada pela Assembleia Geral das Nações Unidas. Essa data já era proclamada no âmbito da América Latina e Caribe, e no Brasil também é o dia que comemoramos ou que saudamos a história e a luta da quilombola Teresa de Benguela. Este acontecimento é uma vitória e é um marco em relação à importância da luta global para alcançar a igualdade de gênero, bem como destacar a contribuição significativa de todas as mulheres e meninas afrodescendentes para o desenvolvimento da sociedade. Mas nós consideramos que, para que isso seja reconhecida, a contribuição das mulheres afrodescendentes e todas as mulheres, principalmente as líderes comunitárias, precisam garantir a emancipação econômica das mulheres negras também, e todas as mulheres, pois o benefício será para toda a sociedade, uma vez que será possível reduzir desigualdades, promover crescimento econômico, garantir o fortalecimento das comunidades, pois mulheres economicamente emancipadas têm mais recursos para investir nas suas comunidades, contribuindo para o desenvolvimento social e o bem-estar coletivo. E, por fim, alcançar a diversidade e a inovação. Grata.
Obrigada, Elcimar, pelas palavras. I just want to summarize a little bit because in the beginning I have some problems with the translator. So she's from an important institute in Brazil that leads with racial issues, and she emphasized the struggles that Black women has in that communities. And okay, it's not a option for Black women, and they have to fight and because they suffer, and it's related to racism and other issues that Black women suffers and the communities. Thank you, Elcimar, again. So I think you have Audrey here. Audrey, can you hear us?
Efforts that are vital to sustainable peace. Important contributions by women, often at the household and community level, tend to go unrecognized. It is therefore essential to link efforts at multiple levels more effectively, to open up the space where women and others excluded from formal forums work, and for this space to receive more recognition. Building resilient communities, women have an innate understanding of the context and effects of conflict on their communities, and they are able to provide innovative solutions and ideas for promoting lasting peace. Women's perspectives lead to peace agreements that are more likely to address the needs of the entire population, leading to overall outcomes for communities affected by conflict. Women often prioritize issues such as reconciliation, economic development, education, and transitional justice over the spoils of war. This broader perspective is essential for building lasting peace, as it addresses the root causes of conflict and fosters a more inclusive society. There are many examples of women building peace and resilient communities, from Sri Lanka to South Sudan to Guatemala, Liberia, and more. And let us remember that the inspiring force behind the Nobel Peace Prize was a woman. Bertha von Suttner struck up a friendship with Alfred Nobel, an arms manufacturer and the inventor of dynamite, and convinced him that weapons were not the deterrence of war he believed them to be, and were in fact quite the opposite. In a letter to Suttner, Nobel famously wrote, "Inform me, convince me, and then I shall do something great for the movement." As a result, several years later, the Nobel Peace Prize was created. Thanks so much to Bertha von Suttner. Thank you so much for the privilege to present.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for reminding us where the Nobel Peace Prize comes from, because we often forget that it really came from the grassroots. We have 2 more presentations, and then we will be coming back to have interaction from the audience. Yes. So we'll hear one more from here, and then we'll hear from the line, and we'll get who is next? Annie.
She's online.
Annie is online. Okay, maybe we'll take the one online so we don't lose the technology again. So Annie, may we have you present, please, online? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I'm not there in person with you in Brazil, but thank you for including me on this very important topic. I wanted to just note the title of the forum, Leave No One Behind, the Well-Being of the Planet and Its People. And that title, it could have been the topic of this particular panel, because when you think of women as 50% of the population, but we are also the mothers of all future generations. And while we live so much in our head and we focus on these topics intellectually, we really need to understand that if we included women, a lot of the SDG issues would be solved. Keeping that in mind, let me go to my job, which is really talking to you about what is the W20. So the W20, as many of you may know, is an official G20 engagement group. And it makes a difference that it is an official group. We have a particular role to actually talk to the leaders and give them our thoughts for women. It was established in 2015, and its mission is to remove all barriers to women-led development and ensure an enabling environment and ecosystem for women to thrive, transcend, and transform their lives as well as others. So it touches every subject. So what is the W20's aim? Well, the primary objective that we have is to ensure that gender considerations are mainstreamed into G20 discussions and then translated into the G20's Leaders Declaration that is produced every single presidency, and ensure that the policies and commitments that foster gender equality and women's economic opportunity and empowerment. And every year this is done through a document called a communique, and I believe that the Interfaith Forum also does a communique as well. Our communique is sent to the Sherpa in the hopes that our words and suggested policy recommendations will be included. I would say in the last couple of years, we have been very lucky. In Indonesia, we had the first standalone paragraph and 14 cross-references. So we're trying to make sure that in every subject that we talk about at the G20, that we think about women. As I said, and I believe our first speaker said, we're half the population. If I'm talking to the finance ministers, I'm telling them we're half the taxpayers, or could be. But it is so easy in the world we live in to forget women. In this particular year, we have 5 areas, and they do change year by year. And Brazil has done an astounding job by actually allowing us, the W20, to send input to the Sherpas early on, and then secondly, to the finance ministers. That's the first time this has happened. So kudos to our sisters who are leading Brazil's W20. And one really important point that most people do not realize, even though we are a quote-unquote official engagement group set up by the leaders back in 2015, is there is no funding. And I'm sure those of you who are on the panel there are not surprised that there is no funding for the W20. So the delegates must use their own money, their own time to travel to this, to put on the events that need to take place. So it does, even though we're official, it makes it very difficult to get voice. And so thank you for all of you who are here who are echoing the importance of women's leadership. So this year, let me tell you quickly about the 5 topics. And they usually do rotate around health and education and economic empowerment. The first one is women's entrepreneurship, access to financing, and capital and markets. And when we talk about women's entrepreneurship, we talk about all stages of that, from women entrepreneurs who are the women entrepreneurs out of necessity, who take their product and go to the street or the local marketplace and sell it, as well as very large businesses. And so we are looking at all levels of this, and we're looking at access to markets, and by access to markets we mean local markets, as I gave you that local example, as well as international markets. In this particular year, and we're getting some traction, it's government procurement. Because every government buys a lot of things. They buy marketing, services, etc. And if women could have equal access or a chance to bid on it, then that would really change the marketplace for women's access, as well as private procurement. And some corporations go out of their way to make sure that they have women suppliers of that. But we're asking governments as part of policy to open that space. Within there's also e-commerce and international trade. If you're having trade fairs or you're going on trade markets, are you taking all male businesses? Let's look and make sure women are included. The second big topic is women in STEM, or sometimes called women in STEAM. It's science, technology, and math, and making sure, and engineering. And sometimes the A is added for art. But it's having the digital divide, and we're looking at connectivity and usage. If women don't have access to the internet, they can't learn or participate the same way. If they don't have access and use of a mobile phone, the same sort of thing. So we delve into these deep areas. But also this particular year, as we choose the advanced topics that are coming on with innovation in the world, it's also AI. And we want a global ethical use of AI principles that include a gender lens to ensure equality and prevent bias. We've seen often, and this deals with a number of factors, where certain people succeed in the world. And so if you are building an employment base looking at who succeeds, people that succeed in HR practices or companies that succeed, you're going to now rule out women because the algorithms are not going to show that women there. So if you use a gender lens, you open it up, you also open it up to diversity as well. And looking at women, you also are able to see other vulnerable populations. The third area is the care economy. And so really looking at developing this as a growth sector for the economy. We often put these in financial terms because in the G20 we're talking to finance ministers and leaders who are looking at a return on investment for their country. So we want workers to be paid and be provided social protection. and engage men and boys in caregiving responsibilities while eliminating the high informal and unpaid work among women that still exist in most G20 countries. The great thing about the care economy is that we are then looking after providing even better support to little ones as well as our elder population. It's a win-win when you pay women and you engage men and boys in creating a sector that cares for the most vulnerable parts of society, and it allows women to be freed up to pursue jobs, education, etc. Another area that Brazil has chosen this year is tackling violence against women. And in this way, we are talking about three really separate areas. And it's home, the domestic violence. It's in the workplace harassment, and online. And there's a new particular area called technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which has a real uptick where women are being harassed online. So we ask for regulations, commitment to strengthening policies, and really looking at cross-border issues on this. And the final issue that I'm particularly fond of is, and it's really a new area for the W20, is climate justice. And what Brazil has really done so well is they brought in the value on indigenous knowledge. And with this, it's not just about the environment, but it's about really valuing the input of the indigenous. And it's not just about Brazil, because while Brazil has started this, a lot of countries have forgotten their indigenous people, and by bringing it at this level, it really can amplify around the world. There is one cross-cutting theme that Brazil has also included, and it was spoken about by one of our other panelists, and that's intersectionality, race, and ethnicity. And in the W20, because we're also ruled by consensus, this has come up a number of times by other governments, but has never been able to go forward because we have to all agree it's a consensus. So I'm very proud that Brazil has raised this as one of the main cross-cutting themes. And the final area that is always an underlying area is data. And we have asked all the countries to please track women, because we believe we can show that if women are invested in education, if they're invested in business, if you're looking at health and you're doing research only on men, and you're not looking at women's health, you're actually impacting future generations. So let's track this. Let's just measure it and look forward, because in the future, then we'll be able to show it. The other things I just mentioned is that each country really has chosen different things to put forward. Indonesia really pulled in rural areas. Italy pulled in the health issue, and India also pulled in rural areas. So each country is able to influence this. What we really want across all, and I challenge the rest of the conference, is for every single discussion to ask about any policy or recommendation. How does this impact women? Are women here at the table? Are they leaders in this discussion? Don't talk about women without including women as leaders. And studies will show that better decisions are made with diverse leadership. So including women at the table makes a positive difference. Thank you. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne. We should have had you in the beginning, because purpose of this is really for us to keep giving more ideas on what has been decided, what's on the table, on how we can widen it. And you've done a good job of getting that, building on what other people have said. And I think I'm going to have our final presenters, and then we can start to have the conversation. We have two more. After you, then you just take.
Boa tarde a todos os presentes, àqueles que estão nos acompanhando virtualmente, e quero cumprimentar a todas as nossas amigas aqui presentes, fazendo parte do painel. O meu nome é Kátia Kozlovski, eu estou aqui pela CONIB, Confederação Israelita do Brasil. É uma instituição brasileira que zela pelos interesses e bem-estar da comunidade judaica no Brasil, garantindo a continuidade e o desenvolvimento do judaísmo, mantendo a sua herança espiritual, cultural e social. Mas a meta, uma das metas principais da CONIB em seu estatuto é o combate à intolerância, ao antissemitismo, à defesa da justiça social e ao diálogo interreligioso. Infelizmente, temos enfrentado nos últimos meses, mais ou menos um ano, um aumento substancial de antissemitismo aqui no Brasil. Já ultrapassa a casa de 1000%, infelizmente. Essa é uma realidade que é importante sabermos. Bem, o nosso painel ele se baseia em mulheres construindo a paz e comunidades resilientes. Eu gostaria de abordar aqui o presidente da Associação da Família para Unificação e Paz Mundial, Koichi Sasaki, que disse que a mulher é a chave para a paz na sociedade. O Instituto DIEESE, em sua pesquisa, publicou que a maioria dos domicílios no Brasil é chefiada por mulheres. Dos 75 milhões de lares, 50,8% tinham liderança feminina, o correspondente a 38,1 milhões de famílias. Já as famílias com chefia masculina somaram 36,9 milhões. Essas mulheres resilientes e desconhecidas, que são donas de casa, cuidadoras, balconistas, secretárias do lar, faxineiras, agricultoras, motoristas, letradas, doutoras, analfabetas, etc., nos ajudam, sim, a acreditar e persistir na paz de todas as sociedades. Buscando entender nossa importância dentro do G20, eu gostaria de ressaltar dois aspectos. A do sagrado feminino. Um estudo de Regina Machado, apresentado em 2020, em Recife, apresentou o sagrado feminino como um movimento de despertar cura, conexão e empoderamento de mulheres. É um mundo de mistérios e clareza. É permitir que a mulher, e não só ela, mas ambos os sexos e pessoas de todos os gêneros, despertem em seu interior a energia feminina. O segundo aspecto que eu gostaria aqui de abordar é de uma palavra em hebraico que se chama techuvá. É uma palavra feminina em hebraico, mas traduzida pelo masculino em português, que quer dizer retorno. No livro A Arte da Techuvá, Ensinamentos do Ravi Kook, somos levados a desejar o retorno à origem, o retorno à luz original. Ele nos diz que a tarefa de elevar o que é baixo na vida rumo à perfeição nunca cessa, tem que ser constante. Ao nascermos, seríamos influenciados ou mesmo contaminados pelo nosso derredor e nos afastamos e afastamos da nossa essência de pureza e amor original. O Fórum Interreligioso que participamos é o resultado da busca de que cada religião tem praticado essa busca, através dos seus integrantes, pela techuvá, pela origem, pela pureza, pelo amor. Que possamos contribuir para que o G20 busque também sua techuvá, para o resgate da origem dos povos em seus relacionamentos entre si e com o nosso planeta. que sejam abraçados também pela harmonia da justiça social e econômica e balizados pelos direitos e deveres de cada um de nós, principalmente com os oprimidos, com os menos favorecidos, com a natureza e com os animais que cruelmente vivem seus holocaustos diariamente. Entendo que tudo isso poderá ser realidade se o G20, juntamente com o Fórum Religioso, implantar marcos de datas e prazos a serem atingidos por todos os países integrantes para uma política educacional desde a alfabetização até os mais distintos postos acadêmicos. Seria uma política comprometida com a implantação de grades educacionais para corrigir toda e qualquer prática de discurso de ódio, de preconceitos nas suas sociedades, sejam eles religiosos, raciais, de gênero ou social. Importante estarmos atentos à Agenda 2030, sim, de desenvolvimento sustentável, dos ODS 4, 10 e 16, principalmente. E, assim, resgatar o respeito necessário às diferenças. Investindo-se de forma comprometida na educação, sufocaremos esses crimes. Aí, sim, poderemos ter liberdade e paz. Façamos techuvá enquanto é tempo. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Kátia, pelas suas palavras, por enfatizar a chave da mulher para a sociedade, pelas suas contribuições aqui para o painel e para o futuro aqui da inserção feminina melhor e participação mais efetiva na nossa sociedade. Let's hear Rachel Taverner. Thank you for coming, and we are ready to hear you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this conversation. My name is Rachel Taverner and I work at ACT Alliance. As we have heard, faith-based actors play a pivotal role in advancing gender equality and significantly contributing to building peace and resilience in communities. Whether in times of crisis, of conflict, climate emergencies, or the COVID-19 pandemic, it is often faith-based actors, especially women, who are rooted in communities and are there as first responders. Yet, in global policy spaces such as the UN, we often only hear a narrow version of religion, particularly Christianity, which is mobilized and instrumentalized to block progress on achieving universal and interdependent human rights. We are witnessing increasing polarization and backlashes on gender equality and women's leadership from both within and beyond our faith communities, where women working to build peace, advance gender justice, and foster resilient communities are experiencing targeted attacks to silence them, whether through death threats or online and offline intimidation. Opposition to gender equality is not a new phenomenon, sadly. During the COVID-19 pandemic, people who oppose human rights became increasingly well-coordinated, well-funded, and well-interconnected around the globe. And this has resulted in their ability to obstruct global policy processes, and women and girls' bodies are often the battlegrounds of these policy discussions, resulting in restrictions to access health, education, and economic rights. I have the privilege to work for ACT Alliance, a global ecumenical network of over 150 faith-based members, with 90% of our membership being national and locally rooted members. We've learned with our members the power of transforming communities from within and contributing to diverse movements to advance gender equality. This requires action to be locally rooted, address the context, and speak truth that empowers. Often the most powerful change makers are people within the community themselves, in particular religious leaders who are trusted and respected voices. For example, the ACT Argentina Forum are affirming faith narratives on dignity, self-determination, liberation, autonomy, and justice using transformative approaches to dialogue, contextual Bible studies, and faith-based advocacy, or in that in the Act Zimbabwe Forum, who are mobilizing faith actors to address deep-rooted social norms and patriarchal interpretations of religious texts to transform masculinities to advance gender equality. And our communities of practices which bring together faith-based actors to strengthen one another's capacity and collective advocacy. For example, in the Middle East, advocating to reform discriminatory family laws, which religious actors often have huge influence, but they can restrict women's inheritance and property rights. And we found the most powerful change makers are those religious leaders and faith communities advocating from within. To conclude, as I know time is short, I want to share a quote from a report that we co-published on looking back to look forward, because we believe looking back at the journey that we've traveled is so critical when we think through how looking forward. And often religious and faith-based action, particularly on gender equality, is an evidence. It's in informal spaces sometimes, it's outside big government programs, and it's really critical that we are able to build up that evidence base. In this report, it proposed that whenever religion enters the public sphere and becomes powerful in politics, it tends to orbit around gender issues. Patriarchal gender norms are packaged in the language of religion because it legitimizes them. It makes them appear divinely ordained and unchangeable. The interplay of religion and gender is at the heart of achieving gender equality. As we heard this morning, religion is not part of the Sustainable Development Goals, but religion and gender analysis are critical in how we advance sustainable development, not only for Sustainable Development Goal 5, but in all areas of sustainable development. We sometimes have both religion and gender becoming tick box exercises. Have you consulted women? Have you consulted faith actors? But we need to think beyond that and look and seek out those transformative actions as we work together on the road to equality. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We now open for some input from the public. We apologize that it's taken this long to come back to you, but we are so appreciative for this input, and I don't know if you can help us with the microphone. Yes.
Yeah.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Roberto e eu fiquei muito na dúvida qual grupo escolher, né? Qual painel, né? E eu acredito que por uma sensibilidade feminina eu decidi por aquilo que pode realmente resolver a questão do nosso planeta, mais energia feminina. Me remeteu aqui algumas coisas, fiquei até emocionado, ainda estou, né? Porque eu ouvi falar no sagrado feminino. Nós coordenamos a implantação do primeiro grupo do sagrado masculino no estado de Santa Catarina, há 6 anos atrás. E foi um grande aprendizado para mim. Mas o que me remete hoje aqui, que me traz, é que eu estou coordenando um grupo de 7.000 entidades, que vocês chamam de ONGs, né? Aqui nós chamamos de OSCs, né? OCIPs. E me preocupa muito, apesar de termos uma representação significativa feminina, mas ainda tem um olhar, uma visão machista de nós homens e também de mulheres. Foi uma coisa que me surpreendeu no exercício do sagrado masculino, para discutir o nosso feminino, né? As nossas questões internas. Então, o que me trouxe aqui, na verdade, é um pedido de socorro, pedido de ajuda. Gente, a gente precisa empoderar, né? Não gosto muito dessa palavra, mas de organizar. A gente que já trabalha há muitos anos em áreas de excluídos, a gente sabe que são as mulheres que são a cabeça de casal. Então, nada mais justo, não é fazer proselitismo aqui, reconhecer aquilo que já existe, que acontece no Brasil e no mundo. As mulheres é que seguram a onda, como a gente diz no Rio de Janeiro. Quem segura a onda sempre são as mulheres. Então, a gente está se propondo a organizar cooperativas, microcooperativas, né, ONGs especializadas, para organizar as mulheres, para que elas possam realmente ser agentes do seu próprio processo de mudança e de conscientização. Religião, eu chamo de espiritualidade socialmente engajada. Ou seja, nós precisamos de uma espiritualidade de ação. E aí eu penso que a organização das mulheres poderia dar uma resposta a isso. Obrigado.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So we will not try to respond to this so that we can have input from many people. I saw a hand there.
Olá, boa tarde. Meu nome é Carolina. Eu gostaria de expressar minha profunda admiração pela riqueza das reflexões que cada uma de vocês trouxe hoje ao debate. É muito inspirador ver como essas perspectivas de mulheres de diferentes contextos e especialidades e contextos religiosos podem convergir para a construção de um futuro mais pacífico e inclusivo. E, nesse sentido, eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta para todas as painelistas que se sentirem à vontade para responder, que é: se cada uma de vocês pudesse elencar uma única proposta sobre o papel das mulheres na construção da paz, valorizando a diversidade religiosa que o IF20 preconiza, para ser encaminhada por este evento aos Sherpas do G20, qual seria essa única recomendação? Obrigada.
Okay, we've noted it. We'll come back to it. Let's take some more. Yes, please. Prepare yourself with one word answer.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Bina Nepram, Senior Advisor on Indigenous Issues at the United States Institute of Peace. My question are twofold. Today at several plenaries, we had menels. Only men, you know. Even in the field of religious circle, as Bani, you mentioned 5 Ps. So it's not that we don't love our men, but I think we are still a long way. So how do we change this? We are in the intersectionality of women, of religion, of peace, and that protection that no one is left behind. So that's one. My final question is in terms of gender budgeting. You know, there was a time when the budget spent by the government of India on one day of International Yoga Day, one day is the budget on women and child for the entire year. So this is the skewed manner in which the budgeting, unless there is investment in issues, you know, we are not getting there. So how do we increase the level of budgeting for us, for women, so that we are able to be at that playing level field? Otherwise, it's all doles now. $100, $200 to women in Global South, give them for their looms, give them for their swing machines. So how do we really change this economic imbalance? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any more at the back? Who wants to do the gender? Wait. Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Tri Sakti Handayani from Indonesia. Currently, gender problems are still to become world issues, especially in developing countries. What strategy can be used so that women can play a role in building peaceful and resilient communities? If a country policies and culture do not have a gender perspective yet. Thank you.
Okay, I think I see no other. Then I'll come back now to the panelists.
According to the first questions, I think Katia has some comments and can go to the second, okay?
Sure.
Eu fiquei feliz com o comentário eu não me lembro o nome, mas do nosso querido participante masculino, do Sagrado Masculino. Sim. E esse estudo que houve em Recife em 2020 me chamou muita atenção, porque ele tinha um objetivo de trazer a agroecologia para a visão xamânica, holística, despertando o sagrado feminino para as mulheres, como também para os homens, para os outros gêneros que têm dentro de si o sagrado feminino. Todos nós estamos integrados pelo sagrado feminino, pelo sagrado masculino, e todos entendemos que esse sagrado feminino, ele desperta, ele ressalta, talvez por termos a dádiva como mulheres de conceber a vida, mas que sem o sagrado feminino ela não existiria. Obrigada.
Thank you so much. I also want to speak to the point that the gentleman made at the beginning about the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, and this dichotomy as I see it. I think we have to look at our sacred humanity and think of the advancement of women as being the advancement of all. So it's not women versus men, it's when women advance and men advance, society advances. And in the year 2024, I think we can move past, the women, all of us. Somebody mentioned a manel earlier in the day. Well, this seems to be I don't know how we'd say it, all-women panel. And surely I'm very encouraged by seeing at least 50% of the audience is men. So clearly you're interested in the issue. It would have been very nice if the organizers had a couple of men on this panel as well, because the advancement of women is not only about women, it's about gender equality and advancement of society. That was the one thing. And then Bina mentioned the economic imbalance of one country spending its entire budget of what's normally given to advancement of women and children on a yoga day. Can you imagine how much that country is actually spending on its military budget? Probably many, many times of that yoga day. So really another recommendation to the G20, and really what we should be doing in these discussions is making recommendations that can be sent to the G20 leaders, is to take just a sliver of their military budgets or other budgets and invest in resilient, pluralistic communities, as my panelist to my right had talked about, because it's when we invest in those strong communities, there will be resilience and resistance when conflict comes. And lastly, it's well documented that in societies where there's gender equality, there's much less chance of conflict.
Thank you. Anyone of you wants to speak to something else?
Yes. Well, I think that they always say that the personal is political. So I will say personally, when I was very young, I got a book from my grandmother, and it was a book called When the Great Founders Were Girls. And these were the great founders of Catholic religious communities, so communities of nuns. So this is probably one of the first books I read. I was like 8 years old or something. And I read the stories of these girls like me who went on to become the leaders in their, communities, right? They founded these religious communities. And for a while, I wanted to be a nun because I thought, wow, these women, these were girls, and they were playing around, and the next day they were leading their communities. Then I went on to teach Sunday school for like maybe 20 years. So probably it's the longest job I've ever had in my life was teaching Sunday school. And that was leadership for me when I was 16 and 17 and 18, sitting there with kids who were younger than me and teaching the faith to them. And now I'm in a place where we talk about 14% women. We were probably 70% teaching Sunday school, mostly women. And now we're talking about like 12 or 14% in leadership. And what I will say is women in every faith-based community are very prepared to come up with strategies, to come up with plans, and to come up with actions. So every single person here can probably go back to their own congregation, to their own community, and there will be a lot of voices to be heard. Men need to give those voices spaces. That's all that men need to do. They need to step back from the traditional leadership roles that they've had for many, many years, and allow those roles to pass on to the girls who are coming behind us, because that hopefully will not be 14%, but 70%. That's what needs to happen, and it's pretty simple. It's not comfortable because nobody wants to just step back from something that they've worked towards, but that's how it happens. Men need to step back and trust that there will be very many women to take over.
Let me also support this answer. Let me also support this answer with an experience of a case that you can study. In 1989, 69 women met in Ghana, African women, and they said, we want to make a difference in terms of providing data and also providing the depth of writing about ourselves and what is happening with African women, and also going into the leadership of our faith communities. We are multi-faith. 89. Today, we are more than 5,000 African women who come from faith-based communities, all faith-based communities, doing theology together, providing evidence and studying our own communities, and actually focusing on what is it that makes women not take up leadership, and how can we address those issues? Are they financial? Are they responsibilities in the home, etc.? And by the time we deal with those issues at our local level, we address everything that is in SDGs, plus things that are in the scripts that define our faith. Part of what I saw missing, even if we discuss many times about the presence of women in various areas, before we also address how our faith scripts, our teachings, and our cultures define us and make us as women, but also the men in the society define the roles. And if we don't interact with those roles, there will always be somewhere where we get and we don't quite go to the next stage. And when we are in systems such as this, which is both religious and non-religious systems, only the religious people will be able to address their theologies and their teachings and have to be addressed, because the other people stop short of the respect even when those things are oppressive. If a community comes in and says this religious tradition does not allow women to be in leadership positions, the governments and multilaterals will say that's what they believe in, and they stop there. So I want to urge that we also look at what defines the role of women in terms of cultures and religions, and actually address and make changes at that level as well. It requires to come from that level as well. And that's what we do as concerned African women theologians of all faiths. Thank you.
Okay. Posso falar? Oi?
We're out of time, but Elcimar has some brief words to say to us. And I think you can like finish this panel, answer the second questions, which women can say one suggestions for changing the gender inequality. Is okay?
Bom, primeiro eu preciso garantir se está funcionando. Vocês estão me ouvindo? A tradução? Ok. Eu quero, em primeiro lugar, dizer que, para quem não ouviu o meu discurso e fala inglês, eu tenho ele em inglês e depois eu posso passar. Uma coisa é essa. E, segundo, eu quero responder à pergunta que a Carolina fez, mas trazendo comentários, né, que tem a ver com o que já foi falado. Então, primeiro, eu concordo com Bani quando ela diz dessa importância que poderia ter homens aqui também falando. E eu digo que, assim como poderia ter homens aqui falando, nos painéis principais poderiam ter mais mulheres. E aí eu concordo quando nós percebemos que deve ser muito difícil para os homens abrir mão do seu poder. E nós não podemos naturalizar isso, né? Então, assim, realmente, nos principais painéis, poderiam e necessitam e precisam ter mais mulheres, né? E assim como nós sabemos que, para isso acontecer, precisamos de dinheiro. Nós precisamos, quantas mulheres foram financiadas para estar aqui? Então, nós temos que olhar para os nossos espaços também de decisão, os nossos espaços também, que no nosso discurso nós já falamos que lutamos por direitos humanos e equidade. Então, assim, a minha única proposta, Carolina, que eu acredito que resume isso tudo, é que não é impossível existir liberdade religiosa sem equidade. É impossível existir liberdade religiosa se não considerarmos realmente a interseccionalidade em todos os espaços. É isso. Obrigada.
Obrigada.
I don't know if I can summarize it in one word, but I think it's around, while we advocate for the policy changes that we want, we also focus on the accountability. We've got some great laws already existing on gender equality, but where is the accountability in our communities, in our governments? And that requires the funding. So sometimes gender is mainstreamed, which means then the gender budget specific gets shared around, but we also need gender-specific action as well as it being mainstreamed in both policy and budgets. Thank you.
Eu só gostaria de agradecer a honra de estar ao lado de pessoas, mulheres, com tanta experiência e bagagem. Eu saio daqui muito enriquecida por todos vocês e um carinho especial para Elcimar e a nossa querida coordenadora que está ainda presente.
Salete.
Salete ainda está presente? Ah, saiu, mas que tanto nos ajudou para que a gente pudesse estar aqui contribuindo. Obrigada a todos.
Okay, obrigada. You have one suggestions quickly?
No.
Okay. I'm good. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We have to end the sections. We are out of time, so hope everyone can join us for the next panel. Our Environment Minister of Brazil, she's coming to speak to us, Marina Silva. So we invite all of us to stay here and to hear from her. She's amazing. So I think it'll be worth the time. thank you, everyone. Again, thank all the speakers, which was amazing. Thank you for sharing the comments, the suggestions. You are all delighted with your words. Thank you. Such wonderful women here. So we are happy, and you are expecting to have more women in the panels, in the next sessions and events. Thank you, everyone.